when LeBron was in Miami, who did he have? One of the best shooters ever in Ray Allen. Then you have to look at what my boy Shane Battier did on Mike Miller. I think 8 threes in a row. He's always had shooters around him because he was a facilitator. When he doesn't have shooters around, how can you be the best you can be? He's having a great season. It's not about him, but I do think it's about the talent that you have around him. And I think that if you win one championship in 4 years, that's the story. So this year really doesn't matter in the narrative to me, but to fans, I understand, because if it were me...
Chris Webber finally voiced the unspoken tension lingering within the basketball community, aiming a calculated and sharp critique directly at LeBron James. He refused to sugarcoat the situation, bluntly stating that James never managed to secure a championship without first recruiting another superstar to his side. Just like that, the debate over the greatest of all time didn't just resurface. It exploded with a fresh, aggressive energy, and the impact was felt everywhere. This wasn't some anonymous internet troll trying to stir up trouble, nor was it a bitter bench player looking for a moment in the spotlight. This was a statement from Chris Webber himself, a legendary Hall of Famer and a 5-time All-Star who knows the game's highest levels. He is a veteran who survived the pressures of elite locker rooms and battled the greatest icons across multiple eras of professional play. He understands the internal mechanics of building a championship culture from the ground up, making his timing in 2025 particularly devastating. Just as the sports world felt the ranking fatigue setting in, Webber stepped forward with a perspective so piercing and raw that it cut through the noise. His delivery was so deliberate and defiant that it didn't just restart the old argument. It completely set the entire conversation on fire. The digital world didn't just respond. It paused in collective shock for a heartbeat before descending into absolute chaos. Supporters weren't simply discussing the matter. They were immediately drawing battle lines. Yet the complexity of his claim suggests no one's opinion is truly safe. When looking at the talent he was given to lead, he successfully navigated every novice head coach he worked with into the championship finals, leaving everyone to wonder where such a profound basketball mind originated. In the grand scheme of the league, he essentially functions as the Albert Einstein of the hardwood. When analyzing greats like Jordan or Shaq, or even Webber himself, they all relied on established Hall of Fame coaches who brought their own pedigrees. Looking at LeBron, one has to wonder how he developed such a vast knowledge base, given his uncanny ability to dissect every play. The controversy began in a surprisingly quiet fashion, disguised as a standard, low-key discussion about the game's elite players. Webber was participating in what witnesses described as a transparent and unfiltered exploration of the greatest athletes to ever play. It was the kind of candid dialogue typically reserved for private spaces, where players can speak their minds without fearing the next day's headlines. For most of the session, the atmosphere remained intellectual and calm, focused on high-level basketball strategy and respect. The exchange served as a potent reminder of why Webber is so respected for his strategic vision rather than just his physical dominance. However, the mood shifted the instant LeBron's legacy was mentioned, yet Webber remained hauntingly composed, refusing to play for the cameras. He avoided any sense of theatricality, and that stoic approach is exactly why his words carried such a heavy, undeniable weight. He spoke with the conviction of someone who had harbored this thought for years and finally felt the time was right to let it breathe. He claimed rings required recruiting other stars. Those few words left the room breathless. Make no mistake about his intent. This wasn't a sudden outburst intended for shock value or a desperate attempt to grab a headline. Those close to the situation noted that Webber had been building toward this point, focusing on a much deeper philosophy regarding ultimate greatness. He was exploring the friction between carrying a pre-existing roster and manually assembling a powerhouse, a topic that remains highly sensitive among veterans. A significant number of former players share this exact sentiment, though they rarely possess the courage to voice it in a public forum. It comes down to the fundamental difference between being the anchor that holds everything together and the architect who brings the pieces in. Once Webber connected that specific logic to LeBron, everything aligned, even while he maintained that the man is an undeniable all-time legend. The respect for his talent was always present, but then came the observation that left everyone in the room feeling visibly uncomfortable. According to reports from the scene, Webber argued that whenever a title was within his reach, James would orchestrate the necessary roster changes. He made the calls and ensured the environment around him was perfectly constructed for a championship run. He highlighted the massive gap between leading your own team and handpicking a squad to ensure victory, a point that left the room in stunned silence. He openly questioned if that path can even be compared to the journeys of players who lacked that option or simply didn't need it. A heavy silence followed, and once the footage of that moment began to circulate, the resulting firestorm was both inevitable and intense. The reaction made perfect sense once the full context was heard. This wasn't just a simple comment, but a challenge to the status quo. It forced a total reevaluation of how greatness is defined, prompting an immediate and fierce defensive response from the LeBron fanbase. They demanded to know why Chris Webber felt he had the right to judge anyone's legacy, which is a valid point of contention. Webber's own professional journey was a complex tapestry of incredible skill and moments that never quite reached their full potential. He was a specimen of pure basketball genius, standing 6 feet and 10 inches tall with the vision of a guard and an intimidating scoring range. There were extended periods where it seemed certain he would dominate the entire league and define his specific era of play. Yet, despite that undeniable greatness, the ultimate championship glory remained the one thing he could never quite grasp. That persistent truth has trailed his every move throughout his career. Every heartbreaking failure and debated play defines his legacy. Thus, critics often mockingly wonder what a man like Webber could possibly understand about reaching the mountaintop. This isn't just background noise. It is a legitimate grievance circulating in sports circles. However, there is a nuance to this that most people fail to address. Webber possesses the visceral, painful knowledge of what it means to falter when the ultimate goal is within reach. He lived the reality of being an elite superstar who ultimately walked away without a championship ring on his finger. It was a frustrating time because the consensus was that a single victory in his home city would cement his status and hush the doubters. Bringing a title to Ohio was the dream. Ultimately, the narrative shifted beautifully when he departed to win elsewhere before returning to finish the job. Truly, he has successfully navigated several different phases of his professional evolution. During the era when Michael Jordan dominated the court, much of our perception was fueled by pure, unadulterated nostalgia. Claiming he surpassed Magic Johnson feels almost impossible to say out loud, even if the evidence points in that direction. It usually comes down to emotion. One has to wonder how things would look if he had paired his high IQ with another elite talent. He recognizes the immense struggle of building a powerhouse without the luxury of an all-star partner waiting for a phone call. Because he lived through that era, his current insights carry a much heavier weight. When he remarks that championships weren't won without recruiting help, he isn't just looking for clicks or attention. He is offering a raw perspective forged in the fires of actual competition. He represents those who didn't manufacture their own luck, who fought their way up the standings but still missed the final prize. Now he watches a peer reach the same heights through a custom-built path, only to be hailed as the greatest to ever play. This offers a fresh outlook, and in 2025, a growing list of veterans is voicing this exact sentiment. We need to analyze the core of his argument, because this goes far beyond simply pointing out that James had help. Every legend required a supporting cast. That is a basic fact. The real debate lies in how that support was actually assembled. Take an objective look at those championship seasons, setting aside any personal fandom or bias for a moment. Each title run was supported by a roster that wasn't formed through traditional drafts or standard front office trades. There was significant leverage. It was about personal connections. There were times when James utilized his influence to handpick the exact teammates he required to win. To be perfectly clear, none of this constitutes a violation of the rules or an unfair advantage. If anything, it highlights his incredible intelligence and the unprecedented power he holds over the sport. His talent for dictating his own circumstances was something the league had never witnessed, but that is where Webber takes a stand. When a superstar takes such an active role in engineering their own winning environment, one cannot then frame those victories as evidence of solo greatness. This paradox is the core conflict. You can't play both roles. Icons like Michael Jordan never spent their off-seasons trying to convince other superstars to join their ranks. During his prime, Kobe Bryant didn't recruit rivals to form alliances. He stayed within the system, growing alongside his teammates and maximizing their potential. Certainly, they were surrounded by formidable talent, but those pieces were provided through the league's standard procedures. James disrupted that model entirely, and Webber argues that, while that's acceptable, we cannot ignore how that fundamental shift changes the way we compare different basketball eras. Sources deep within his personal network suggest a perspective the mainstream press has ignored. Once a superstar begins engineering rosters, they transcend the traditional athlete label. They evolve into a different type of figure entirely, moving far beyond the scope of a standard player. He is a front office executive wearing a superstar's jersey. That description is meant as an observation of influence rather than a slight. It is a sign of high regard, yet it places his accomplishments in a completely separate category from his predecessors. That is the essence of the debate. Once you set aside your emotions, the logic behind this perspective becomes impossible to ignore. Perfect, because this is where the conversation truly begins to reach a boiling point. Social media platforms erupted in a frenzy, refusing to remain silent for even a moment. Within a few hours of the footage circulating online, the digital reaction exploded into a massive global discussion. A quiet commentary quickly transformed into a hurricane of controversy, with the James faithful rushing to defend their hero. Their rebuttal was straightforward. No champion ever stood alone, noting that even Jordan relied heavily on Scottie Pippen. Bryant utilized Shaq and Gasol, while Duncan leaned on Parker and Ginobili. Why pick on LeBron? Why is building alliances and gathering talent now being viewed through a negative lens? Honestly, those counterpoints are quite compelling. The opposition in Webber's corner refused to remain silent. They were remarkably vocal. Legions of followers flooded the digital landscape, far outnumbering what the mainstream media reported across various hoops forums. A singular battle cry began to echo, eventually surfacing as the definitive rallying point for this massive counter-narrative. This wasn't merely chatter from the bleachers. Rumors swirled that retired legends were nodding in silent agreement. Unfiltered commentators, known for their bluntness, began broadcasting these sentiments, omitting names yet signaling a massive shift in how the message was spreading. A viral post cut through the noise, declaring that everyone knew Webber was speaking an uncomfortable truth. While James sits in the top three, the ultimate crown requires something else. Naturally, the rebuttal was vicious. Critics pointed to Webber's infamous timeout blunder as proof that his perspective on championship culture was worthless. The digital frontier remains a war zone of two loud, uncompromising factions with zero room for a truce. The fire spread from keyboards to the hardwood, igniting debates within the inner circles of the professional game. From front office suites to secluded gyms, the real talk happened where the lenses couldn't capture the honesty. Even in those professional sanctuary spaces, the jury was completely deadlocked on the issue. Many insiders felt Webber finally voiced a long-standing skeletal secret that everyone recognized but feared to utter. To be fair, questioning the king in 2025 remains a dangerous and heavy social gamble. Webber simply stopped caring about the fallout. However, to grasp the gravity, one must dissect both ideologies. The case for LeBron is ironclad and, when presented fairly, it becomes nearly impossible to dismantle. At its core, player mobility is a fundamental right within the modern professional basketball landscape. Navigating the market isn't a loophole. It is the established blueprint of the current era. If he possesses the gravity to pull other stars into his orbit, isn't that magnetism a form of greatness? Managing that level of elite talent demands a rare blend of authority, respect, and supreme leadership. It is often overlooked that he once willed mediocre squads into high-stakes postseason battles they never belonged in. Rosters that appeared to be lottery picks on paper were transformed into title threats solely by his presence, a feat that defines individual excellence in its purest form. Then comes the heavy hitter, an unprecedented level of physical durability over the long haul. The world is witnessing an elite performance sustained across two full, grueling decades. That isn't just talent. It's an alien level of consistency that transcends the help of any supporting cast. That fire is internal. Predictably, those closest to the superstar weren't about to let the slander slide. Deep cover sources suggest his inner circle moved aggressively to debunk the premise of Webber's claims. Their argument was simple. Webber was conflating organizational strategy with the raw, inherent ability of the individual. In their world, those two factors don't negate one another. A leak from the camp put it bluntly. He is more than an athlete. He transformed the game's architecture through sheer, deliberate force of will. Yet, the waters remain murky and the situation continues to grow more complicated. The dilemma has no easy exit because both perspectives hold a massive amount of historical weight. It boils down to your personal metric for legend status. Is it raw, unassisted dominance, or the tactical genius to orchestrate winning eras? This fundamental clash is why the fire never dies. Webber's words just poured high-octane fuel onto an already infernal debate that seems impossible to resolve. The harsh reality is that both conflicting truths can occupy the same space simultaneously. At the end of the day, this wasn't some petty swipe or a desperate plea for internet attention. He struck a very specific, sensitive chord, which is why the impact felt like a sudden sledgehammer. He scrutinized the very foundations of how the king built his empire and questioned the path taken. The story continues to spiral because it exploited a doubt that many basketball purists had buried deep. The battle for the ultimate title is noisier than ever, yet we've never been further from consensus. We are armed with every conceivable metric, every tape, and more data than any generation before us. Still, the answer eludes us, proving that true greatness might be something numbers can never fully capture. Perhaps the truth lies in the nuances that cold analytics fail to grasp. Every ring carries a hidden burden. A fundamental divide exists between those who cultivate success organically and those who engineer it through calculated moves. This is where the tension peaks. Weber stepped into the fray not with solutions but with hauntingly loud inquiries. He spoke with a gravity that forced people to finally confront the reality. Such interrogations carry weight because the whispers people fear to vocalize are precisely what solidify into historical records later. Let there be no confusion. LeBron James stands firmly as one of the 2 or 3 titans to ever play. That fact remains undisputed. However, a persistent, gnawing question continues to shadow his illustrious career. Does his engineered journey align with the sacred, unspoken criteria people demand from the ultimate peak of greatness? Chris Webber ensured that this uncomfortable thought could no longer be ignored without stripping away the king's accomplishments. The hardware remains. The statistical milestones are etched permanently into the books. Those iconic highlights that captivated the masses remain intact. Yet, he managed to pull off something incredibly scarce in sports. He ignited a raw, unfiltered dialogue. He dared to tread upon the sensitive ground that most observers carefully avoid. Neither comfort nor popularity could stifle his convictions. In doing so, he offered a vital reminder to the entire world. The concept of greatness is sculpted by the friction of different eras and personal philosophies. Those distinct viewpoints, even the ones that disrupt the common narrative, are essential to history. The volume of the debate has suddenly exploded. The intense glare of public scrutiny has expanded far beyond the king himself to everyone else involved. Hall of Famers, media pundits, former teammates, and even the current generation are being dragged into the debate. The atmospheric pressure is rising because once a claim like Weber's is aired, the search for allies begins. Even more telling is the current silence. That collective breath-holding is deafening. Several high-profile icons have yet to utter a single word, and people notice. It is not a lack of conviction, but a fear that one wrong syllable could dismantle a reputation overnight. The stakes have escalated. At this moment, the narrative takes a sharp turn. A new wave of stars, those who idolized LeBron, are beginning to signal their positions. They avoid direct soundbites, choosing instead to communicate through cryptic reactions and digital footprints on social media. One can see the internal struggle as they weigh their words. For the king represents their childhood standard. When Chris Webber interrogates that legacy, it sparks a visceral conflict between old-school reverence and modern-day loyalty. That friction is palpable. Simultaneously, a group of retired warriors feels emboldened to voice their thoughts. They are no longer under scrutiny. Years of suppressed observations are finally spilling out as more voices begin to harmonize with these critical sentiments. Their remarks may lack bluntness, but the underlying theme is unmistakable. This is not merely an isolated critique from one person. This sentiment appears to be a dormant volcano that has been simmering for a long time. Now comes the revelation that amplifies the chaos. The battle for the crown is now a war between eras. One faction champions loyalty to a single banner, organic growth, and winning within an established system, without total control. Standing against them is the modern era. This path prioritizes total agency and strategic movement. These are 2 irreconcilable visions of reaching the peak. Weber forced these 2 conflicting worlds into a head-on collision. The mystery is no longer who is best, but which style matters. That inquiry is infinitely more complex because there is no metric for integrity and no clear trophy for it. There are only strong convictions. The realization is that the conclusion remains distant as more unique perspectives enter the arena, with every retired legend speaking out and every active star reacting, adding layers to an already dense saga. A single remark has triggered a tectonic shift. If this momentum continues, the fire surrounding this legacy will not cool down soon. Ultimately, everything converges on a single point. After the dust of 1,000 arguments settles, no simple verdict remains. Perhaps that ambiguity is the point, as the quest for the crown was never simple. Weber did not provide a final answer. He simply made the truth undeniable. The king's legacy remained untouched, yet a new lens was forced upon the masses, challenging the very definition of a basketball titan. That is the exact state of the current stalemate. A massive divide exists between those who value raw dominance and skill and those who argue that a legend is forged by the difficulty of the path and the specific hardships faced along the way. Both viewpoints carry significant weight, ensuring this ideological fire keeps burning brightly. Regardless of the statistics cited or the highlight reels presented to the public, it always returns to a matter of perspective and what one truly values most. Is it the power to architect a perfect situation? Or the inner strength to overcome whatever circumstances are handed to a player by fate? No simple solution exists, which is why the conversation never truly reaches a conclusion. Perhaps this friction is what sustains the game's heart beyond the physical court. Conflicting eras and shifting philosophies are constantly colliding. Whether one views Chris Webber as a prophet or a critic, a single truth remains absolutely clear. This dialogue isn't fading, and now the moment has arrived for the audience to offer their testimony. Does Webber's critique hold significant weight, or is the king's greatness so powerful that the construction of his empire becomes entirely irrelevant? Input should be shared in the discussion, as every unique perspective adds fresh depth to this enduring sports mystery. If this breakdown proved compelling, observers are encouraged to support the content and subscribe for future analysis. This story should be shared with fellow enthusiasts who live for the heat of the argument, as this monumental conversation is far from reaching its final conclusion. The story continues very soon.